Vora,
Thank you.
Rabbi Paul Yisrael Yaakov Ben Bela, and Tana Bas Leah.
Got a couple also. Rivka Malka bat Matil.
Rivka Malka Bas Matil.
Rav Yisachar Dov ben Chaya Bracha.
Yisachar Dov Ben Chaya Bracha.
Rav Naftalia Levi ben Chana.
Naftali.
Rav Naftalia Levi ben Chana.
Naftali Alein Ben Chana.
Any yard sites?
For Shalema. Okay, Scott.
Okay. Rabbi, take it away.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody had a wonderful Yontif, Chag Sameach for Sukkot, and we're back on Yud Aleph on the Beis, and just to recount, since we've begun for several weeks, the Gemara here was discussing the Mishnah on Yud Aleph and Aleph with regard to when if a deer was running through a property, whether the deer was capable of running through or whether it was maimed and couldn't run through. So there's a whole discussion about whether the property of the owner in which the deer or the birds who couldn't fly were in, whether or not that property could acquire those animals or any Metzia through the medium of Chatzar. So Rabbi Yehuda on the Shmuel added the one critical point that the only time that can happen is when it's guarded, meaning either there's a fence around it, or if there's no fence, if the owner is standing next to the field, and that happens, then because he's standing there, that creates a presumption of control, and therefore the Chatzar is kohen. So the Gemara went through all kinds of different discussions, and then said, well, how does that reconcile with the following example? If you remember, the example was that Rav Gamliel and several of his colleagues were traveling on a boat, and Rav Gamliel remembered that he hadn't given Maser, Truma or Maser for that matter. So he had with him two other colleagues, and he gave Rakiva ben Yosef and who was the other, Yeshua Bar Hananya. One was a Levi, and one was the head of the tzedakah for the Aniyim, and it was the year of Masa Ani. So what he said he gave each of them a portion of the field, one for the Masa, one for the Masa Ani. And we'll ask the question, how can you do that? He's not there. In other words, he's giving something and he's not there. That's a direct stira of Yehuda Shmuel, who says you have to be there in order for the kinyan to be valid. But Yeshua Hananya was on the boat with him. He wasn't at the property. So the Gemara then gives different answers and lands with the answer that it was a kinyan agav. And a kinyan agav, we explained, was a kinyan where you transfer land and something that can be on the land, even if it's not on that particular land. In other words, you can transfer land or sell him or give him land, and somewhere else you give him a movable object. So that's how the Gemara answered that question. So it's no stira. Really, you do have to have a guardian, someone standing there, the owner standing next to the property in order for Chatzar to be coded. So that's where we kind of left off. We started the next piece, but we'll review that quickly. So the Gemara now wants to give another distinction, as it were, between the case of Rav Gamliel and our Mishnah, as to why our Mishnah requires it, and kind of he didn't, so to speak. So now comes this, we're in the middle of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, Rav Papa Omer, about halfway through. Rav Papa says, Da Sacheres Makne. So you remember we touched on this just when we left off a few weeks ago. Da Sacheres Makne Oson Shani. There's a difference between acquiring a Metzia or whether someone else gave you something, meaning someone else gave you a matana, as an example. That's different than the case of our Mishnah, where in our Mishnah, no one gave you anything. It happened to be that there was a Metzia on the field, or a deer that had a limp that couldn't really run well happened to be on your land, and we want to say your land is going to be kona. So two different rules apply. One, when you're given something, says Rav Papa, and one, when it happens as a Metzia, it happens by itself. Now, what does that mean? Correct the Gemara Menot Timra. How do you know to make such a distinction? You're pulling it out of the air. What does it mean? One is a case where he gives him, one he doesn't give him. Menot Timra. So he says that Tanan, from the following, we learned in the following Mishnah. Ro'os and Rotzen Acher Metzia. If we see people running after Metzia. Now, in this case, so let's look at Rashi. It's in the, not yet the fully wide lines, but the immediately before it, 8 or 10 lines. With Papa Omer, La'olim b'Torah Chotzer Kone. You really are acquiring Torah Chotzer. Va'afilu hocha lo tukshe le'ula. Now, why Ula? Just because Ula was the one who reiterated Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shmuel's position, and Ula was the one on the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph who said, "V'husha omed b'tzad sadeu." So he re-emphasized what was said earlier, that he have to be standing next to the property. So it says Rashi, "Ula b'Torah Chotzer Kana, va'afilu hocha lo tukshe le'ula." The hodelo being in a hocha omed b'tzad hasadeh. You know why you don't have to be next to the field? Mishum the das acheres makna osam. Because a das acheres gave it to him. For instance, Rabbi Gamliel hikna lehen metaltalim shehoyelo b'chotzer shalahen v'lo mehav kera kanim. Rabbi Gamliel is the one who gave to those two individuals the metaltalin for maser, and it wasn't hefker. It wasn't something that he just found. Venucha matonazu liknos v'afagav dein omer b'tzad hasadeh. So Rav Papa is being mechadesh that this matana, this gift that Rav Gamliel gave them, you can be kona even if you're not on the side of the field. Now, how do you know it? So says the Gemara, he brings it down from this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? If you saw someone running after the Metzia, and so the Metzia is in his field and he's running afterwards. So the Gemara goes on. Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that when something is running through his field, not the case of a deer that is unencumbered and can speed through the property. Talking about a deer that's infirm, that's limping, that basically can't run or stumbles. So you're kind of. But Rabbi Yirmiyah says in the name of Nachman, wait a minute. You're only kona shefahusha rotzachrein magian. Only if you can run after it and catch it. If you can run after it and catch it, meaning that it is so slow that it can't just run right through your field like a normal deer. So you have the ability of catching it and saying it's mine, then it's okay. Otherwise, it's not okay. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah comes. Rabbi Yirmiyah and he asks, "B'matana, hey, what is the din by matana?" Okay, you're telling me that if a metzia, if a hefker deer, just a deer, runs through, okay, you have to be able to grab it, and if you're able to grab it, then you can be kona. What about if someone gives somebody a matana of an infirm deer? Okay, I have an infirm deer. It's a very nice pet. I'm giving it to you as a gift. Do you have to be able to run after it in order to be koned or not? That's the kasha. So the Gemara says, "Kibla memena Rav Abba Bar Kana." Rav Abba Bar Kana accepted from him the distinction. Afal pisha rotzachrein ve'ein megian. No, by matana it's different. If you give me a matana, then even if I would not be able to chase that deer and catch it before it ran out of my property, the fact that he gave me a matana, my land is instantly kona the property, the deer. In other words, the chotzer kicks in the minute you get the matana, even if you can't chase it. My tama, the Gemara, lav mishum dedas acheres makna osam. Shani, isn't it because when a das acheres, when another person gives you something, then we rely on that person's giving of the gift even if you could not catch it. So if the criterion is that you have to be able to grab something on your property, and then it would be okay, then it would be kone, then a matana is different than even if you can't chase it and you can't catch it, it's kone. So we see from this Gemara, from this Mishnah, that there is a chiluk between matana, which doesn't require being able to catch it, and a metzia, meaning something that you just found, which you have to be able to catch. Therefore, Rav Papa says, based on that distinction, I'm making the distinction here that what? That Rav Gamliel, since he gave the gift, he doesn't have to be next to the property. In other words, Rabbi Shiur ben Hananya or Akiva ben Yosef don't have to be next to the property because they got a gift. If it was a question of a metzia, the chotzer can only kick in when it's guarded. So if it's guarded with a fence or guarded with a person, then it kicks in. So now, okay, so he gives us a different answer than before. Before we said it was because of Kinyan Agav. Now we're saying it's because a third-party gift, a third-party receipt of property does not require guardianship by the chotzer. Only a metzia requires guardianship by the chotzer. Okay, that's a logical distinction.
But excuse me, Rabbi, if you're giving a gift that can't be caught, what's the significance of the gift?
Say it again, David.
If you're giving a gift that can't be caught, what's the significance of the gift?
The significance of the gift is to show that if the person is giving you a gift, that gift, in other words, somebody owns that deer. It's not a hefker deer. So if someone is giving it to you, then the chiddush here is that the matana, the giving, is sufficient for you to have it in your reshus without your having to be there. That's the chilik he's making. If it's hefker and anybody can grab it, why are you more inclined to say that it's yours than somebody else who's chasing it from afar? He's running after this deer. He's about to catch it. It runs into your property, and you're going to say, oh, it's in my property. It's mine. What did you do to make it yours? If you're standing there and the chotzer requires the shmira, the guardianship, okay, you happen to be there. It's your chotzer. It's kind of just as if it was a fence, for instance. But stamazai, if someone is running after a deer and happens to run into your field, we're not going to say just because it's your field and it's wide open that it's going to be yours. But if someone gives it to you, that's a whole different metzias. Now, I own it. I want to give it to you. I'm not losing ownership just because the deer doesn't stay in your field. I still gave it to you as a gift. Someone else comes and says and grabs it and says it's mine. Under what condition is it mine? It's either the donor or the recipient. If I give you a gift and someone pulls the gift out of your hand, are we going to say, oh, wait a minute, you can't have it. Someone grabbed it out of your hand. The teretz is that the chotzer doesn't require a guardianship of hiseichel when someone is giving you something. He's giving it to you as a gift. It's yours. What more do you need? That's the distinction the Gemara wants to make. That the whole Indian of guardianship is only when it's hefker, and anybody can grab it. But here, it never loses the context of ownership. It went from me to you. I gave it to you. Instead of putting it in your hand, I said, here, it's in your chotzer, and it's yours. Now, what happens if I give you a gift and you fumble the gift and it rolls away from you and someone jumps on it and says, oh, you lost it. It's mine. It doesn't. Of course, there's no seichel to that because it's yours. You're kind of. So when it comes into your reshus and you're given a gift from a third party, says Rav Papa, it's now yours. Someone else can't just run into your property, even if it isn't guarded, and grab it away.
Tell what you just said to the referees in today's football game.
What's that?
So tell that to the referees in today's football game. If someone fumbles it and the other guy jumps on it.
Right. But the question is, what makes the kinyan? In the case of the football, kinyan is when you grab it in a way that it becomes yours. If the rule says you have to hold it for 3 seconds or whatever it happens to be. So,
right,
it's the same seichel. It's yours once it's yours. If it's yours because I gave it to you as a matana, someone else can't come and grab it away.
Right. Right.
Okay.
If it was Rabbi Gamliel's football field, it would be different. Yeah.
It would be different, exactly. Right. All right. Now, so that's the distinction. But wait a minute. So we're not yet finished. Omele Rav Simi le Rav Papa. So Rav Simi says to Rav Papa, wait a minute. Your distinction isn't a good distinction. You're saying that if it comes in someone's reshus and it's a matana or it's given by a third party, so the key is the third party is giving it to me. Therefore, it's not like a metzia. Our get, we have the case of a get. The das acheres makna also. How does the wife receives the get from the husband? So that's a das acheres, meaning someone else. It's not a matana, of course, but someone else is giving her the get. So that's the key, according to Rav Papa. And what do we say the halacha is? The halacha is that if the husband wants to give the wife a get, and instead of giving it to her hand, he wants to throw it into her chotzer, meaning into her possession, or in her dalan amas, he can do that. But wait a minute. What do you mean he can do that? That means she has to be there when he throws it. So you're seeing a case where das acheres, a third party, still needs guardianship. He can't just throw it into her chutzner and she's and she's on a cruise somewhere, and then she comes back and finds a get in her backyard. No. She has to be there when he throws it. So if she has to be there when he throws it, and it's coming from a third party, how can you tell me that a third party throws it into the chutzner and into the field, and it's an automatic? Why is it an automatic? A get isn't an automatic. Get has to have the wife has to be there. So it's a gevaldige kasha. We see that chain of das acheres, of a third party giving, isn't always valid. Amphit the Gemara, no. You can't draw a distinction from get, shani get, to isa ba'al karcha. In other words, you can, the wife can be divorced ba'al karcha, meaning against her will. So therefore, we establish that the only way you can make it against her will is if she's there. If she's not there, you can't do it against her will. And if you remember from a couple of blats before, which is going to be germane now, we had a discussion as to whether or not a chotzer, whether a wife acquires the get, if it's her chotzer, does she acquire it because of chotzer or because of yad? Remember that discussion. So what does yad mean? Yad means that it's an extension of her hand. If a husband comes to his wife and he wants to divorce her and puts it in her hand, no question she's divorced. So the question now is, if he throws it into the chutzner, which she's standing, is that like yad? So if you remember at that time, we went through the pasuk of the Torah, and the pasuk of the Torah there says that that it's yad, and learns out from the lashon of the pasuk that yad means not literally yad, but it means yad or something that is like yad, and a chutzner in which the wife is standing, the Gemara says is like yad. Remember, it says v'kasal sefer krisis v'nosan biyada. So it says v'nosan biyada. So the Gemara there dashes, since it says v'nosan biyada and doesn't say ubiyada yitnehu, that he gave it into her hand, we're saying v'nosan, he gave it. How did he give it? Biyada, to her hand or something like her hand. So a chutzner in which she is standing is like her hand. That's how the Gemara learns pshat over there, and that's what we're going to say here. We're going to say that since it's a chov, since she has to accept the bal karcha, therefore we have a different rule. But in the case of a regular matana, there is no bal karcha, right? Therefore, we say that she doesn't that you don't have to be there, because a third party has given you the gift, and the gift is yours. So let's take a look at Rashi. So Rashi, back up where it says, so there the Gemara said only when he has the capability of running after it. Hatzvi mahalach v'hagozos medadim. Even the lame deer is walking, and the birds are hopping, so to speak. Masnissen diktoni zoch solo sode kagon shahoya yochel l'rutz achrein. He can run after them. Magiyim kodem shiyotzim misadeu. In other words, they're not so fast because a quick deer he wouldn't catch. So if the deer is hobbling along and you can run after it and grab it, that's pshat kaina. So that means it's kaina. Okay. The boy Rabbi Yirma b'matana heich. He asked the question, what about matana? If these tzvi or these birds belong to someone, the heim betoch sada chavero, and they happen to meander into your field, my friend's field, v'nosim balem labal sada b'matana, and the owner of this somewhat lame deer says to his friend, "You're kaina, it's yours." Hey chadin, mi be'inin v'hu sherotz achrein amagian v'ilo lo. Do we say he has to run after it, and if he catches it, fine. If not, not lo kana. Which turns out to be a matana almanas lahachzer, meaning that if he gave him the deer and you have to run after it and he doesn't catch it, then it reverts back to the giver. It doesn't belong to somebody else. It reverts back to the one who gave it. Oh, lo. Or do we say no, that it belongs to him because he doesn't have to actually have caught it because the guy gave it to him. So Kibla Minei Rab Ava, Lahach Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, he accepted this from this question of Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Shapa Dak Yesh Chiluk Me Matana Lehefker Me Matana Afalpi. There is a there's a chiluk between matana and hefker, and then a matana, even though he can't catch it, like we said, the matana is still valid because the giver intended for him to have it. He didn't mean that he has to run after it and catch it. It's his. It's his. No one else can take it. Okay. So now, V'omar Ula, the Meseches Gittin, Gabahazorek get leishto b'soch beso b'soch chatzera. So we see that she has to be there. So the Gemara answers, Shani get the isya bal karcha shu nosna lo v'lo nicha leila megarsha. She doesn't want to be divorced. So because she doesn't want to be divorced, it's a bal karcha. So therefore we say bal karcha, she has to be there. Okay. So that answers the question. Shani get. Now comes the Gemara Viter and asks the following question. So we're now 5 lines from the bottom. Maskivle Rab Sheshis Bered Rav Idi. Rab Sheshis Bered Rav Idi asks a question on this chiluk. We just made a chiluk by matona between get, which is bal korcha, and a regular matona, and he throws it on its ear, and he asks the following question: B'lav kal v'chomer here? Who isn't it a kal v'chomer? In other words, just the opposite of what you're saying. Uma get the isa bal karcha. A get which is by force. I omedes b'tzad beisa b'tzad chatzera in. Ilo lo. If she's standing next to her chotzer, then she accepts the get. The get is valid. Ilo lo. Matana de medate lo kolshkein. So he's asking the opposite question. He's saying, no, the distinction isn't because get is bal chov. If by a chov you require her to stand there because otherwise she wouldn't accept it, then by a gift, a fortiori, for sure she should accept it, because why would she otherwise accept the gift? So you have to hear the kasha, because we can anticipate the answer. We almost know the answer from what we've learned before. But he's asking the kasha here, if something that you require her by force to accept, you require her to be there, then something that isn't by force, why shouldn't she have the choice to accept it or not? So of course she should be there to decide whether to accept it or not. That's the kasha. In other words, sure, you could say, okay, it doesn't matter. But we're saying in the Kal V'chomer that it does matter, because she should have the freedom to reject what's being thrown into her field. Says Rashi, V'lav Kal V'chomer min hatam hazeh yesh lodun de kolshkein lekinyan acher. My get the chi isa b'tzad chatzera lo nicha lo lekaima afilo hocha kaniya lo chatzera. A get which she doesn't want to accept, Yet, if she's standing in her chutzah, she has to accept it. I'm reading the isa in ilolo matona the lesser bal karcha. It's not by force. The armalobina lo kania. If she says, "I don't want this," why are you forcing it upon her to accept something she doesn't want? Maybe it's an ugly gift. Maybe it's a gift that she absolutely doesn't want. Maybe she doesn't like the giver and she doesn't want to receive anything from him. She doesn't want anything from him. You're going to make her receive it, bal karcha? That can't be. So the kasha here is the other way around. If bal karcha, something which she has to accept, she has to be there. Something that she does not have to accept, how can you say she doesn't have to be there? If she's not there, she doesn't want it. That's the kasha. So again, from everything we've learned beforehand, the answer becomes pretty clear to us in a minute. But so the havamina here is that a person should not have to accept something that's against his will if he has the freedom not to accept it. That's the premise of this kasha, of the Kal V'chomer. All right? Ela Omer Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi comes along and he says, no, top of Yud Beis Amid Aleph. No. Different theory. Chotzer is Rabbi Mishum Yad, V'logora Mishlichus. A chotzer is kone because of yad, by get. We're talking about get. Chotzer is Rabbi Mishum Yad, which we said before, that it's because of the pasuk. It's included in the category of yad. V'logora mishlichus. Gabe get. So v'logora mishlichus, and it's not worse than shlichus. In other words, so you have a sort of a compound sentence. Chotzer is mishum yad because the Torah tells us. But if the Torah didn't tell us that it was mishum yad, it wouldn't be worse than shlichus, than any kind of acceptance because the chotzer is your shaliach. So what does that mean? How do we interpret that? So says the Gemara as follows: Gabe get, Baya get the chov hula. It's a chov. She has no choice. In chavin la'adam ela b'fanav. We only are mechuyev someone in front of him. B'fanav. What does that mean? That means I can't sort of, so to speak, here indict. It's not an indictment, but I cannot force you to take something unless you're there to physically accept it. Then you have no choice but to accept it. You have no choice but to accept it because it's a get. But if you're not there and you're sunning yourself in Jamaica, then it doesn't work because it's a chov. However, the famous, sorry, Chaim?
No, I was just saying you can't put an onus of any kind on someone without them being there.
That's correct. But gabe matana, what do we always say by matana? The sechus hulo. The general consensus is that a matana is a schus. What does it mean it's a schus? Yes, you can say in an isolated situation, I don't want your gift. I reject you. But generally speaking, a matana, which someone receives gratis, is a schus. It's a benefit to him. And we take the expression, Zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, we take it literally. That Zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav. Yeah, in other words, for a zechus, if someone wants to give you a gift, okay, we just had Sukkot, someone says, you know what, I bought a beautiful esrog, I have a second, I want to give you a gift of the Arba Minim, please accept my gift. So the general consensus is that it's a gift. Even though we have a pasuk, Sona Matonas Yichye, that someone who is sort of a anti-receiving matonas, Sone Matonas, it's a strong word, the hater, Sone Matonas Yichye. Nevertheless, the general rule is that if someone is benevolent and gives you something, then Zachan lo shelo b'fanav. that he receives it. Now, he can reject it. Once he actually gets it, he can reject it. So the klal is, rather than we saying it's rejected ab initio right away, we say, no, it's rejected only if you make a physical rejection.
Excuse me,
Now,
excuse
with
me.
this distinction, it becomes clear, because a get, which is a chov, and ein choven la'adam ela b'fanav, therefore the wife has to be present at the field to receive it. Otherwise, we say that you cannot receive something that is not, because it's a chov, it's a responsibility. And we don't say chov. A matana, so in this particular case, where this generous donor gave the owner of the field a deer, a hobbled deer, but a deer, so we say zachan l'shlo. That's a nice gesture. So therefore, he doesn't have to be there to accept that gesture. Now, he can physically come back and say, I reject this deer, I don't want this deer, but he has time to do that later. At the time of the event, we say it's a schus, that it's a positive thing that he's going to accept this gift, and therefore he doesn't have to be there. And that's what the Gemara is trying to say. Therefore, a chov, a get, cannot be compared to a regular matana. Yeah, Jay.
Nowadays that we ask the woman to accept the get if she doesn't want to. So how do they relearn this whole Gemara with that kind of a premise?
No. The halacha is that she has to accept the get. Today, again, today we do it a little bit differently because of shalom, because of other things. We say that we want the wife to accept it and to accept it voluntarily. But al pi halacha midaraisa, she doesn't have to accept it voluntarily. It can be bal karcha. Yeah.
Even today.
Yeah, even today, right? We try to do between because of shalom. We don't want to make machlokes and everything else. So we bring them together, and the Rav says, do you accept this get? And we do everything. But al pi halacha, that's not the case. That's not the case, because midaraisa, the get can be given bal karcha as long as it's within her possession to receive it. So you can't. So what the Gemara is saying is you can't compare get, which is an unusual circumstance, to the case of a regular matana, where in the case of a regular matana, zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, it's better. It's a schus for someone to receive the thing. Again, he can always reject it later. But since it's a schus, therefore he doesn't have to be present. So therefore, Rav Papa's chiddush is that the chiluk in our Mishnah, which talks about what? It talks about a deer that was hobbled that happened to be running in the field. Okay, your field, which is unguarded, deer run through it every day of the week, or birds fly in and out. So what are you going to say? Just because it happens to be your field? No. If you're there and you could catch it, remember the caveat is you have the potential of catching the deer, then it's yours. Someone else comes and grabs it, no, it's yours already. But in the case of a matana, where it comes from a third source, then you don't have to.
Right. A question. Yeah. So what about, and this I think of the modern day example of somebody signs up with Verizon or whatever, and they say, oh, if you buy one phone, we get another one free. You can give it as a gift. Well, you can give it as a gift to somebody, but it comes along with now they're stuck on a contract for 2 years. And the old version of it applying right here, very, I think, similarly, is you give somebody a lame deer. Yeah, they've got a thing that's worth something, but they're also now responsible to feed it and take care of it, which has costs to it. And you might decide, in either case, well, okay, this is a nice gift, but it's not worth it to me because of the extra expense I have to put towards it.
Right. So therefore, we say, you're absolutely correct. Therefore, we say, Zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav, that initially it's his. No one else can grab it. He can then come and say, I don't want it. I don't want it, just for the reason that you say. It's got strings attached, or I don't want, what about, I have a lame deer, I have to start feeding it, I can't enjoy it or whatever. You're 100% right. But the question here is, initially, is it a chov or is it a schus? So we take the general rule that if someone is really getting a real benefit, like a pleasure, zachan la'adam shelo b'fanav. In your case, you're right. If I'm gonna give you something and there's a string attached, now I have to do something or have an undertaking that's beyond what I want, I reject it. But I have the power to reject it once I come to the field. Here the question is, does the field automatically mishum chotzer kona? Yes, the answer is, it is kona. Someone else can't take it. You can then come and reject it and say, Mr. So-and-so, thank you for the gift, but I really don't need this, or I don't want it, or whatever. But the question here is whether the chotzer can be kona initially. And the answer is yes. It can be initially kona to the exclusion of everybody else, but you still have the opportunity to say thanks, but no thanks. So that's the chilik here, because you're right. Sometimes the gift isn't what it seems to be, but we say generally speaking that that someone gives. So again, it's probably a gift without strings attached. That it's not a burden. But if it becomes a burden because he has to feed an animal that he doesn't really want, then that's nothing. All right. So that's the chilik the Gemara gives, and okay, makes sense. Now, Zok Rashi, the bottom Rashi, Ravashi is a very long Rashi that just summarizes everything. So I just want to skip over it, and I want to go to the Rashi and Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Gabi matona d'schusulo zochalo the odom shelo b'fonav v'shalom medato, and without his knowledge. The anan sadeh, because we are witnesses, the nichale shetehei shlucho, that we are witnesses that the chotzer should be his shliach. Hilkach, kilesa b'tzad chatzero, if he's not next to his chotzer, deleka l'dmuya liyoda, that it's not yad. Remember what the Gemara just said, that chotzer is rabbe mishun yad, v'lo gora mishlichus. That chotzer we learn out from yad, that it's like his hand, but it's not worse than shlichus. So normally we would say it could be shlichus, but when it can't be shlichus, then it's yad. So in the case of a get, let's just think a minute. In the case of a get, she accepts it by hand. Remember, we have the Gemara previously that said that if he's married to a katana and he wants to divorce her, then he can't divorce her mishum shlichus, because a katana can't kona something from a chotzer. Chotzer applies only to a gedola, not a katana. So if chotzer applies only to a gedola, how could you divorce a katana? Teretz is, the chotzer is like a yad. And just like if you gave it into our hand, you give it into the chotzer mishum yad, not mishum shlichus, because there's no shlichus by katana. So we see that pasuk, really we want to say that the chotzer is mishum shlichus. But when you can't have shlichus, then you have yad. So the yad is the add-on to what a chotzer normally is. That's how we look at chotzer in the case of get. So the anan sad the nichale shetei shluchah hilkach ki lesa b'tzad chatzero the lekadet muy liyada, where you can't compare chotzer liyad. For instance, the ain't a smuchala because she's not near it. Typically, then you say that she's zoche because chotzer is mishum shlichus. So in other words, this yad and shlucha thing is a little tricky. So where you say that she's not next to the field and needs to be, so it's not yad, but it's shlichus. So therefore, she's calling it mishum shlichus. And by shlichus, we say, generally speaking, zachalosha adam shalom b'fanav. Therefore, chatzera nam zachalosha shalom b'fanav. So that's the case by a matana. Gabi Metzia, in the case of our Mishnah where it was a Metzia, he lesa gaba, and she's not next to it. The lo nafkes chiyasa mishum yad, that she doesn't kona, she doesn't have the schus mishum yad. Lekel rebuya mishlichus. You can't include shlichus by a case of Metzia. Now Rashi is going to explain why. The gabi shlichus ika das shaleach or das shaliach. In the case of shlichus, what do we have? We have a giver and a receiver. So the giver has a seichel, right? He knows what he's doing, and he gives it. And we have a receiver a person who is a shaliach. So you have one or the other. In other words, you have a shaliach or a shaliach. You have the person who gives it or the person who receives it. Aval chotzer leke lo da shaleach lo da shaliach. In the case of a Metzia, and it runs into his chotzer, you don't have a shaleach because there's no third person. It's a Metzia. So you're lacking in the shaleach, below da shaliach, and you don't have the das of the shaliach because it's a chotzer, it's inanimate. So you have no shaleach or a shaliach. Hilkach ve'inan das acheres makna osa. You see how what the chap is. So by the case of a Metzia, why isn't it valid? Because by a chotzer you need either someone has to have a das, someone has to have a seichel. Either the giver, I want to give it, and therefore if I want to give it, that's enough. Or the recipient says, I'm zeichel adam shalai b'fanav because I know the owner of this field will want it. So he's a shaliach. In the case of a chotzer, by a Metzia, you don't have anything because it's a Metzia, so no one gave it, and it's a chotzer, it's inanimate. It has no seichel to receive it. Therefore, we say by a Metzia, you have to have a third person do it. But in the case of a regular shaliach, where someone gives, a third person gives it, you don't have to have a recipient who has knowledge, meaning you don't have to have a person. It can be just the chotzer because you have the shaleach giving it. So Rashi is explaining to us very clearly what the theory behind all of this is that in the case of that you have to have one of the two. So by get, normally speaking, the chotzer is a shaliach. Where it's not a shaliach, then you have yad. But this whole thing of yad, by a regular matana, you have to have either a giver or a receiver. If you have neither, then the whole thing doesn't work. Therefore, you can't receive it. Therefore, he's explaining the theory of why, if it comes from a third source, from another person, you don't have to have a live recipient. You can have a chotzer, an inanimate chotzer, because you have a shaleach. You have someone who sent it. Okay, so that's now the distinction that the Gemara makes. And okay, so we have it's a valid distinction. And so we have two terutzim on the whole kasha. One is it's kinyan agav, and the second is because it comes from a third party. If it comes from a third party, then then the chotzer doesn't need a guardian. But if it has no third party, as Rashi explained, you need to have a guardian because you don't have a shaleach or a shaliach. You have neither. All right. Now the Gemara asks an interesting question. Gufa. Gemara asks a different question. What do we see? We said in the Mishnah that if he saw an animal running through his field, then if it was a tzvi shavur or gozlos or they hobbled, then it's a possibility of him owning it. If not, not. Frek the Gemara Azoi. I'll ask you a different kasha. Right? We interpreted that means that if it was a hobbled animal, if he could run after it, then it's okay. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'matana heich. What happens with the matana? So kibbul mena Rav Abba bar Kana afal pi shirotz achreim ve'ein megian. It's still okay. So that's just repeating what we said before. That in the case of a matana, then it's different than a metzia. Correct the Gemara Azov. Boy, Rav asks the kasha. Zorik arniki bepesach zeh v'yotze bepesach acher. If you have an open window in your house, and it's a hot day, you have your windows open. I come to your house, and I take arniki. So the Rashi says an arniki. Zorik arniki is like a bag or a purse or something that typically that you hold money in. So
right. Well, that's Hebrew as well. It's an arnak.
Arnak, right? And hefkero, and he made it hefker. It wasn't owned by somebody. It was hefker. I took that arnik. I came to your window, and I threw it through your window, and it went out the other window. So in other words, it didn't land in your house. It went in one window, out the other window. So boy, Rabbi, Zorak Arnika b'Pesach Leviyotze b'Pesach Zeh Mahu. Avir she'ein sofo lo nuach k'manuach dami olo. Do we say that it went through the air is it as if the air suspended it and it went right through? Or do we see kemunach lami because it went into your reshus? It's your private home. I threw something through your home. It traveled 10, 15, 20 feet. My aim was good. It came out the other window, but it was in your home. So do we say that the air in your home makes it kemunach as if it rested, and therefore it's yours? Interesting shayla, right? What do we do? So Rashi says, Zorak Anike B'Til Chodam She'ein Sofel Nuach B'Tocha Avir Kemunach Dami. Is it like it rested? V'Kono Balabayis Harishon Olah. Is that? Remember, it's hefker. It doesn't belong to anybody. He made it hefker. So the minute he made it hefker, anybody can get it. So the Rashi says over here, is the Balabayis Harishon the one whose house it is? Is he Kona Olav Kemunach Dami? If it doesn't land, if it will not land, it will not land because it's going on a straight line. Is it kemunach dami? Because if it's landing on if it's going on a trajectory where it's about to fall into your house, and it means on your floor, that's kemunach. The kasha here is, if someone is in your house, a stranger, and he grabs it before it has a chance to land and it's hefker, can he claim it because he can say it's hefker, it's not yours, it didn't land in your house? That's the kasha.
Why do we have to use a house? Why not just a field, a corner of a field?
It could absolutely. It could be a field. You're absolutely right. I'm standing on one side of the field. I take a football and I throw it and I say, this football is now hefker. And it's traveling and it's flying and it's flying. And if it wasn't stopped, it would fly directly over my property into someone else's property.
We don't use air as a question earlier in the Gemara. We never use air as a.
That's why he's asking the kasha. Based on what we're now saying, does air fit into the picture here? That air can be kemunach or not? That's the actual question.
So, Rabbi, it sounds like you're talking about, do you basically own air rights to your property?
Correct. But it's more than right. In other words, do those air rights considered as if it's kemunach? Because you have to have a nicha, it has to rest in your property. Mm-hmm. So if it flies into your property, the minute it hits your air right, is it as if it is in your property, meaning it's physically landed in your property? No one would argue that if it's landed in your property, that it doesn't belong to you. The question is, if it doesn't land into your property, are air rights valid enough that it's kemunach? That's exactly the kasha. So the B'shenichtas la'aver kono balabayis. Right, so that's the question. The Tnam b'mesechtes gittin hoisa omedes b'rosh hagag. Again, we're comparing it to gittin. If someone was standing on the top of, if a wife was standing on she had a parapet, and she was standing on the roof, v'zorak laget, and he's standing on the sidewalk, and he throws her a get, kiven shenichtas la'avir hagag, since it goes into the air of the gag. In other words, it's over the roof, so it's on the air of the roof. Harizem megureshes who? It's megureshes. In other words, if it flies onto the roof, before it lands, it's in the air on top of the roof. Megureshes, says the Gemara. There in Gittin. Or hulamala v'hilamata. He's standing on the roof and she's on the ground. Kiven sheyotza reshus hagag. Listen to this. He's standing on the roof. She's standing on the bottom. He throws it outside the air rights of the roof into her air rights. V'hilamata, nimchak or nisraf. If the get burned up before it hit the ground, okay? Someone threw a Molotov cocktail, hit the get, blew it up. Where's the get? Harizu megureshes, says the Gemara. What does that tell us? That since it hit her air right, it's hers. It didn't land yet. It hit her air right? He's on the roof. He throws it down. Something intercepts the get. It burns up, and it's hers. So because of that, the kasha is, again, comparing to get, the kasha is, what happens here if you throw that arnica through the window or through the property, doesn't matter, and all of a sudden someone grabs it, it's hefker, someone else grabs it, are the air rights valid or not? That's the kasha. So we're asking, kemunach nami olo, is it kemunach or lo? So now, Omale Rav Papa, it's the same Rav Papa who we just had before, says l'Rava, Omale Rav Adaba Masla l'Rava, Omale Ravina l'Rava. Someone answered Rava. One of these three Amoraim answered Rava. Lav Hanu Misnissen. Isn't this the exact Mishnah we just learned? If you saw someone running after a Metzia, right? And then, so what did the Gemara say? So he made an exception that you have to be able to run after it and catch it. And Rav Yirmiyah asked the question, what about Matana? The Kibla Mine Rav Abba Barkana, it's okay. So now you have this whole thing in front of you. So in the case of someone, a third party who threw it, right? He's the giver, he's the sender. The third party, you can be kind of it, l'chara, you can be kind of it without it ever hitting the ground, because you don't have to be able to catch it. You don't have to be able to catch it by a matana. Only time you have to be able to catch it is if it's a metzia. In other words, it's a found object. But when someone is giving it to you or sending it to you, whatever, if someone is sending it to you, you don't have to catch it. It's enough that your possession, your chotzer, your house, your field, whatever, catches it for you. So l'chayra, even if it never hit the ground and it just went right through and went out my property, it's already mine. It's already mine because my chotzer caught it. My chotzer grabbed it. I don't have to be there. I don't have to do anything. That's the kasha. So this Mishnah should be proof positive to that question, right? So what do we think about that? I mean, that's a tremendous thing. That my possession has such strength that even if it whizzed right through my property, it's mine. I don't have to be there. I don't have to guard it. All right? So that l'chayra, that's a good kasha. And for the Gemara, no.
If your dog catches it, it'd be the same thing, right?
Right. No, absolutely. If it was yours and he hold on to it, then right, that possession belongs to you. And in fact, yeah, the answer is yes, and you're going to see from the next Mishnah how we extrapolate that. Yes, but the answer is that if something belonging to you intercepts,
right,
it's yours. But here, nothing intercepted it, other than the fact that it whizzed through your chutzner. It whizzed through your chutzner.
So they're making the air equivalent to a dog or anything else that has a living thing that can intercept.
Right, but look, Yale said it correctly. Today, I mean, legally speaking, we have air rights. If you own a property or a building, then the law tells you that you have air rights up to it. You don't have it at Shemayim, but you have air rights, 20 feet, 30 feet, whatever it happens to be. So because you have air rights, it should belong to you. All right, so let's just get to the answer because it's almost time. So Amalei, so Rava said to him, no, I don't accept that. Misgalgal ka'omris. Shani misgalgal de kamanuach dami. In our Gemara, we were talking about, our Mishnah is talking about a deer or a bird or a metzia, whatever it happens to be. It's on the ground. If it's on the ground, says Rava kamisgalgal, it's as if you rolled it. And the fact that it's attaching itself to the ground, not really attaching, but rolling on the ground, meaning the ground is sort of grabbing it even though it rolls, that's different than if you throw it through the air where it never touches the ground. That's the chilik. The ein magian alma misgalgalin, says Rashi v'yotzen hein, the ein sofer l'nuach u'ka'oma de konole sodeu. If someone, like the bird, is the infirm bird or deer, is running through your field step by step by step, and it's not going to stop, we say that the field can grab it, even though you can't reach it since someone gave it to you a matana, right? But when someone is going to give you a matana, or in this case it's hefker, and he throws it to your into your possession and it never lands, so the Gemara makes a distinction that air rights alone are not koneh. There has to be some way to interpret that it's attached to the ground. So for instance, if I throw something that I throw it on an arc and then it's going to land, right? It's going to go up. Let's say I throw a football high up in the air and it's clearly going to land on your property. I didn't throw it 100 yards. I threw it 50 yards and my property is 70 yards. So it's going to land on the ground. Comes somebody else and intercepts it on my property, no dice, because it came from a third person. So according to Rav Papa, that's already enough. And my ground is going to be kona it. And you're on my ground. You can't intercept and say it's, oh, I have it. But if I take that matana, that item, let's just say, and I throw it, and it was never going to hit my ground, it was going to go completely over my ground to someone else, then I can't argue my chutzner is kinda, it's mine. Why? Because it's the equivalent of a bird flying over my property. Oh, bird, you're now mine. What kind of, that's narish, right? It makes no sense. So even so he wants to learn from our Mishnah. He says you can only learn from our Mishnah where the ground has the capability, the chutzner has the capability of being being koneh. Where the chutzner has no capability because it was never landing, then he says for that I can't accept. So that is that's the answer he gives. So I mean, some of the Mefarshim say that's still not clear, but and then in the event we can't extrapolate from our Gemara that the case that air rights in and of themselves are kinda. We have to maybe from another source, but not from this source. So Rashi says at the end that ein magiyah. So all right. So Mitzvah next week we'll pick up from the Mishnah, and then Jay, on your question about a dog or something else in your possession, we're gonna that's the clear, and we're gonna understand whether or not something or someone else can be kind of for you. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Scott.
Next week.
Okay, till next week.
Yeah.
Man.
Thanks, Scott, for helping out.